beautiful plant people, how are we today? Welcome back into the greenhouse. If we haven't met already, I am Sam. I'm your plant collector in Melbourne, and today's video I've been kind of excited to do. I have had this one in the back of my mind for quite some time now, but essentially today we're playing Mythbusters. I have 5 very common beliefs. I genuinely believed that these 5, would you call statements or claims, were actually true, when in fact they're not. Some of them you may know already, some of them I'm hoping you don't know yet. So today is going to be quite interesting. But before I get started, there is one thing that has been on my to-do list for ages and I keep forgetting every time that I film. And it is to remind people that if they feel so inclined to, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, because I was looking at all of the analytics and I figured out that 97% of you watch these videos and are not subscribed. And it could be potentially that people have just forgotten, but please don't feel obliged. If you enjoy this planty content, please feel free to subscribe down below. But without further ado, let's get into it. Plant Busters! Should this be a segment? I feel like this could be a really fun segment. So here is our first claim. And the first claim is you need drainage holes in your pots. Some of y'all gonna come for me, but I have experienced firsthand that this is not always the case. So depending on the plant that you have, majority of aroids and things that are epiphytic will definitely enjoy drainage holes, because these plants don't necessarily love being wet or moist for a very long period of time. But there's a but. There are in fact plants that don't need drainage holes. These are things that love water, and so one of them being a colocasia. For those that don't know, very similar to an alocasia, but these ones, or some species, really enjoy being in water always. Like these are ones that are going to be in a lake just by like the side of the river, and their roots are always exposed to water. I have experienced firsthand that one of my very first plants, I think I'll have to go inside and grab some footage of it. I put it in this glass with this beautiful macrame without a drainage hole, and it was glass. So there is no way for their water to escape. And one of my very first plants was a Tenanthe Brulmarxi, and that is what is currently sitting in my bathroom. It has been in that jar for like 3 to 4 years, and it has never experienced root rot. It goes to show that it depends on the plant. For me personally, I do recommend drainage holes, particularly for those that are like new to plants and they don't know how much or how little to water. Having the drainage hole there is kind of like a secure thing where all of the excess water, instead of pooling at the bottom, will drain out. But because I had it in a glass, I could see exactly how much water there was. Do I recommend drainage holes? Yes. Do you need them? Not necessarily. It depends on the plant. Daryl from the Houseplant Journal has gone through this maybe once. I think it was either on his Instagram or YouTube, but he has had a like epiphytic plant in a glass jar that almost looks like a fish bowl for a couple of years now, and it just goes to show that it depends on the plant. Oh yes, the next one's a good one. And despite your disbelief, bigger is not always better. Now, if you told me this at the start of my plant journey, I would have been like, ha 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 ha. Back in the day, my preference was definitely bigger plants because I loved how mature and all of the beautiful traits, and it was really hard to find more established and bigger plants that when they used to come on the market, that I used to get really excited and think I need that plant. But now that I've had big and small plants, young and older plants for a couple of years now, I have figured out that there are definitely pros and cons to each. Having a small baby plant and having like a cutting versus a very well established plant that has been around for years. Let me go with the big plants. I feel like the biggest pro for having a really big plant is that because it's really well established, it's got a really awesome root system, that they are less susceptible to dying off. Even if it loses a leaf, if it loses some roots, that it can still reestablish itself because it's still got a massive system in place. If it has root rot, chances are that it's got a very established root system, that even if it got rid of some of the roots, that there's still a very large portion that are very healthy. Bigger plants are typically easier to look after. And I say that because it definitely depends on each species, but what I'm talking about is when I have the same species and I've got a younger juvenile baby version compared to a big established one. And I think that's what pulls everyone to wanting a really big plant, is because that they're really hard to establish and it takes so much time and investment into getting a plant to such a big size that everyone wants the big plant. There are cons to this. So one of them being that because it's a bigger plant, it's going to be way more expensive than if you were to get a cutting or a baby plant of it. With these big plants, they keep getting bigger. So if you're in an apartment, if you've got a room that has lots of other furniture and you don't want it to be too invasive, big plants may not be the best option. So big plants, while they are stunning, they are a statement piece in any room, but definitely comes at a price. Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons of a little baby plant. Straight off the bat, they are way cheaper than a big and established plant. I know that a lot of people are either buying into seedlings or even little cuttings. One pro is that if you are limited with space, having little baby plants is such a great way because you get to feel the satisfaction and ticking off the plants that you want. There is definitely a pro in terms of being with that plant and watching it grow from small to big. There is something very satisfying about it that a big plant cannot necessarily give you, but there is definitely a con to it. So particularly with cuttings, that they may die. They are way more susceptible to any disease, to pests, and they require a lot more watering than a bigger plant. Because they are in such a little tiny pot as well, that these pots dry out faster. Just like a normal baby, like a fur baby or like a human baby, when you have anything that is younger, they essentially need more care. Your itty bitty baby plants are definitely not as robust as your big established plants, but my goodness, are they cute! All right, and on to the next one. What is the third myth that we are busting? You shouldn't fertilize in winter. This one I get asked a lot about. My answer to everything, mostly in life, is it depends. So let me give you a little bit of context for you. So this is irrespective of where you live in the hemisphere, what season it currently is, what kind of climate you have. When it comes to winter, there is less sun. In terms of intensity and length, because the days are shorter, the sun may only pop out for a couple of hours, but not only that is the intensity. The intensity of the light in winter versus growing season, let's say in summer, is so different, and you can even feel this if you were outside. And because of this reduction in duration and intensity of light, a lot of your plants will slow down in terms of growth, and that is completely normal. Some of them will have yellowing of leaves because of that transition of there is less light, which means that your plants grow less, which means that they actually need less water. It's the idea that plants go dormant. If your plant goes dormant, you definitely do not want to be fertilizing it and smashing it with nutrients because it doesn't need it. During winter, there are a few plants that if it hits a certain threshold in the temperature, it is too cold for them, they'll go dormant. They will essentially say to themselves, it is too cold, I'm going to hibernate. And so they will drop their leaves and they will conserve their energy, and then later on in spring come back. These plants do not need any fertilizer. If your plant is going dormant and it has ceased growing, then you do not need to be feeding it any type of fertilizer or nutrient. Chances are you're probably going to chemically burn them. So that is why a lot of people end up stopping fertilizing, and it's because they are scared of over fertilizing in winter. But I promise you, this is not for everyone. So if you are in Melbourne, if your plants are in your home and they are not constantly warm or growing, don't fertilize. But if your plants are still growing, by all means, you are welcome to keep fertilizing them. What I suggest is dialing it back a little bit. So for example, my fertilizer that I use, or my nutrient, is GT Foliage Focus. Let me go grab it. This is my Foliage Focus that I use with all my plants. It comes with the directions telling you the dosage. So for example, you can do a weak, normal, or strong. And so what I normally tell people is that during winter, if your plants are still growing, by all means, keep fertilizing them, but do it at a weak dose. And like I said, if your plant is still growing, you can still keep feeding it. And for those people that are up north and they don't necessarily experience a cold winter, I know a lot of people that continue to feed their plants all year round. So really it depends on your climate. I'm quite lucky that I have the greenhouse, so you can probably see that I have the shade cloth taken off so that these guys are getting quite great light still. But these guys have been growing all season, all winter long, and that's why I haven't stopped feeding them. I've been feeding them once a week on a week dosage, as well as with root roids, and they are still growing like crazy. So to put it simply, if your plant is still growing, keep feeding it. Oh, this one's a good one. This one may cause a little bit of controversy. The higher the humidity, the better. And you guys know me, you know my channel, it's all about tropical plants here. Particularly when I first started plants, and especially with anthuriums, I thought that anthuriums needed to have like 99-100% humidity always, every day, all the time. I can tell you that this is not always the case. Some of them really require it more so than others, but I have found some plants also don't enjoy it. It totally depends on the species of the plant and where they are naturally occurring, but there is also this idea that people forget that plants adapt. Every time I tell people that essentially had no misters and no humidifier for over a year, and I have anthuriums, philodendrons, all of these tropical plants, and it's because those plants slowly got used to not having high humidity. They kind of learn to get tough. So essentially, that if you've had a plant that is in a very high humidity always, and you were to take it out outside in a different environment and it was really low humidity, that plant could possibly die. These plants are used to so much fluctuation in both the temperature in the greenhouse and humidity that they are, I feel, a lot more robust. That when I take these plants outside and I leave them in the house, they don't stress as much. And it's all about that idea of adaptability and slowly making your plants used to a certain environment. So for example, you're not going to want a plant jumping from a 90% humidity always constantly to something like 40% humidity. That plant is going to get shocked when it enters this environment. But with my plants, they were definitely gradually introduced to less and less humidity, and they still thrive. They are not in the optimal conditions, so they're not growing optimally, but they are still growing and happy. The idea that a plant can really thrive in an environment and tolerate an environment is something that I like to put out there, because a lot of people forget that these plants are able to adapt. Here comes the last myth. Underwatering is better than overwatering. And I used to constantly say this on my channel, and I think that it is because I'm such an overwaterer and I've killed a lot of plants because of overwatering, that I thought to myself, that means underwatering must be better. And my conclusion was that because I've lost so many plants to overwatering compared to underwatering, then it must be better to do underwatering. But interesting fact, underwatering can lead to overwatering. And this concept is quite confusing, but let me explain. And the best way that I could possibly explain is with this. This is my Anthurium luxurians x Crystallinum, and it has been with me for like, I'm gonna say 2 years now. And I have constantly underwatered it and then overwatered it. And it's only because I've had clear pots that I've been able to even visually see it happen. I overwatered this plant and one of the leaves fell off. So I thought to myself, I really got to like bring it back. I got to pull back on the watering, which made me underwater. With underwatering, the roots end up drying out. They go brown, they go crusty, they really like shrivel up, and they essentially dry out. So imagine you've got all of these like dried up material roots. If you then go and water it and it has a lot of water, these dead roots will actually rot. Ho ho, you've come full circle. My opinion is that you really don't want to go to two extremes very quickly. If you have overwatered, you do want to pull it back, but you don't want to pull it back so much that it gets underwatered. If you have trouble figuring out under and overwatering, my biggest suggestion to you is this bad boy right here, which is a moisture meter. This will tell you exactly when you should be watering, and keeping in mind of the species of your plant, whether they like to be in the moist or in the wet. But I find that especially when you're a beginner, this is amazing. So despite common belief, it is better to underwater than overwater, I truly believe that it is just as bad as each other. And that pretty much wraps up my video for today. Were you surprised? Keep in mind, in terms of modality of these claims, that they are very like extreme. It must be this. And essentially all of my answers are, it depends. When it comes to plants, there is no massive definitive answer. Something that may work for me may be different for you and your experience as well. So please do keep that in mind. But I think I do want to do more of these like myth busting videos more often, because I find them quite fun. Thank you so much for hanging out in the greenhouse with me once again. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys. Mwah!